All right, let's take a look at Viking costume. And you'll see that just as with Viking art, yes, you can see that it's all part of a pan-European story. But just as with Viking art, they put their own spin on everything. So let's look at menswear first. It starts off with a kirtle. A kirtle was a trimmed tunic with a very full skirt, like this. Now listen guys, you are going to run into the word kirtle a few more times in this course, sometimes spelt differently, and sometimes used to describe an item that is completely different. We saw that earlier, didn't we, in this lecture with the chiton. The chiton to Byzantine, and in Byzantine costume, is completely different to a chiton in ancient Greece, but it uses the same word. You're going to find this with the kirtle as well, just to confuse you even more, mind. And here we see the Viking kirtle, which was a tunic. Beneath the kirtle, there was an under tunic. It was kind of shapeless and often just made of scraps of fabric. People didn't see it, so it didn't matter how it looked. It was underwear. Layers were important to the Vikings. It's cold up there, isn't it? In what is modern-day Sweden, Norway, Denmark, these northern European nations, it's really cold in the winters, so layers were important. A variety of leggings, some loose, some tight, some with feet built in, kind of like a modern onesie, and some without. And then what the Vikings did, they would get long pieces of wool or felt and wrap them around their legs, again for extra warmth, like this. And these little leather lace-up booties worn by both genders. On top of all this, there would be a cloak. Okay, a cloak, sometimes they were made of fur, sometimes wool, sometimes trimmed with fur, sometimes not. And then these wool or felt kind of beanie hats. Hardly the Viking warrior, is it? But this is what most people wore from the Viking culture. Now let's look at women's wear, which is a bit more interesting. Okay, it started off with a tunic cut underdress with long sleeves. But then they had an item of clothing that only the Vikings wore. It's called a Hangar Aag. A Hangar Aag. You can really see that that's sort of a Danish-sounding word, isn't it? Hangar Aag. Sometimes it is spelt with a K, sometimes it is spelt with a CK, and sometimes it's just spelt with a C, as I have done here. The Hangar Aag was sort of a pinafore, and we'll take a closer look at it in a second because it has a very interesting element. And then a headscarf, white linen, that's all it was, secured at the nape of the neck. And here we see it all together again, the little boots, the Hangar Aag, the tunic. So let's look at the Hangar Aag. Basically, it was a pinafore that was held up with two straps and fastened with brooches. But the cool element I was telling you about is that between the two brooches there hung a string of beads. And from this string of beads, Viking women would hang everything they needed for the day. Hangar Aag, right? They would hang purses with, money in it, maybe some herbs for luck, a knife, scissors, a comb, everything they needed for the day they would hang from their Hangar Aag. And then they would have a belt sort of slung around their hips, and they would hang everything from there too, keys and purses. It was sort of like wearing the contents of your handbag on your body. And of course they would have their linen headscarf, and in the winter everything would be topped with a leather cloak or a wool cloak or a fur cloak, or this one has both. And then if we put this Viking woman in her landscape, this is a reconstruction of a Viking village in the snow, you really understand that fashion is not an island, it is a response. Hanging all of your stuff from your Hangar Aag beads meant that your hands were free, which means you could, keep your hands warm. You didn't have to have them exposed carrying things around. Yeah, Viking fashion, it was different, it was unique, it was informed by a larger aesthetic, but you should recognize it as being quintessentially and quite uniquely Viking.